That tree was a liability to the whole community, and frankly, you should be thanking us for handling it. That was Brenda Saylor, president of the Wagon Hollow Owners Association, standing at the end of my gravel drive on a Tuesday morning in late September, telling me my 140-year-old bur oak had been a danger to property values. The chainsaw crew was already loading the last rounds of the trunk into a chipper. She had a clipboard against her hip and a travel mug with a gold rim, and she was wearing a magenta blazer over white capri pants in a place where every other adult was in work boots and dust. My name is Cole Renner. I am 62 years old. For 31 years, I built and maintained county roads for the highway department in this part of the mountains. And when I retired, I came home to the 40 acres my grandfather homesteaded on the back side of Wagon Hollow, where the pavement ends and the gravel I poured myself begins. I tell you my trade up front because it matters to everything that came after. What Brenda did not know, standing there so pleased with herself, was that the road her whole subdivision used to reach the highway did not belong to the association or the county or the developer. It crossed my land. I held the deed. I had surveyed it myself, and I had the recorded easement that said exactly who was allowed to drive on it and who was not. So let me ask you something before I go any further. If somebody cut down the oak your grandfather planted, the tree your wife was married under, and then told you to thank them for it, what would you have done? Sit with that. I will tell you what I did, and I will tell you it took 2 years and not one raised fist. The oak stood at the corner of my front pasture where the drive met the county line, and it had been there longer than the subdivision, longer than the county road, longer than anyone with a clipboard. My grandfather planted it the year he proved up the homestead. A slip of a thing he carried up from the river bottom, wrapped in a wet feed sack. And he used to say he planted it so his grandchildren would have shade he would never sit in. I sat in it my whole life. By the time I was a boy, the trunk was already too big for me to get my arms around, and the lowest branch held a rope swing my father hung, and the bark on the south side wore smooth where 3 generations of us had leaned against it to pull off muddy boots. My wife, Dana, married me under it on a July afternoon with the whole valley smelling like cut hay and the cottonwood fluff coming down like slow snow. She wore her mother's dress and stood in the green shade with the light coming through the leaves and coins on her shoulders, and the preacher had to raise his voice over the meadowlarks. We were married 30 years. When the cancer took her 4 years ago, fast, in a season, I spread part of her there in the shade, in the low green swell where the roots had pushed the ground up over a century. Because she had told me once that if there was anywhere on this earth she belonged, it was under that tree. I built a bench there that fall so I would have a place to sit with her. My daughter Mara was 11 then. She helped me build the bench, holding the boards while I drove the screws, getting the spacing wrong on the slats and crying when I gently took the drill back. And we got it right together by dark. She is 15 now, tall and quiet and watchful. And she sat on that bench with me more evenings than I can count. She is the reason I am careful to tell this straight, because she watched every step of what came next. And a man teaches his children more by what he does at the worst moment than by anything he ever says. And I wanted the lesson she took from this to be the right one. Wagon Hollow started as 12 ranch parcels strung along the gravel my family had always used to reach the highway. Sometime in the boom, a developer named Halpern bought up the failing places one at a time. The way a flood takes a bank, a little here in a dry year, a little more when a widow could not make the taxes. He platted them into 50 lots and sold the dream of mountain living to people from the city. The kind of people who wanted the view but not the work, and who signed the covenants without reading them because the covenants came in a fat envelope at closing along with 40 other pages. The association came with the lots. For years it was harmless, a quarterly newsletter and a Christmas potluck and an argument now and then about the color of mailboxes. Then Brenda Saylor bought the showpiece lot at the top of the hill the one with the glass deck cantilevered out over the valley, ran unopposed for president because nobody else wanted the headache, and decided the association's authority extended to every blade of grass she could see from that deck, including mine. The trouble was that my 40 acres were never part of the plat. My grandfather's parcel predated the subdivision by 80 years, and when Halpern drew his lines, he drew them right up to my fence and stopped, because my land was not his to draw. I have read enough plats in my life to know what a man is doing when he draws a line and stops. And Halpern stopped because his own surveyor told him to. The only thing connecting his 50 lots to the highway was the gravel road. And the only reason that road existed at all was a written easement my grandfather had granted back in 1961 to the original 12 ranches so their families could get to town in the mud season. 12, not 50. I had read that easement so many times I could recite the operative sentence in my sleep. It granted access to the named parcels and their heirs for agricultural and residential use. And it reserved to the grantor and his heirs the right to maintain, gate, and control the roadway. My grandfather signed it in fountain ink at a kitchen table and had it recorded at the county the same week, because he was a careful man who had watched a neighbor lose a water right by a handshake. I come by it honest. The carefulness is the inheritance. The land is just where we keep it. I knew all of this on the morning Brenda told me to thank her. I did not say any of it. I have learned that the moment you show a person like that your hand, they start building a story about why your hand does not count. So I asked her one question. I asked her who had authorized cutting a tree on private property without the owner's consent. She smiled the way you smile at a slow child. The landscape committee, she said, had determined the oak overhung the roadway and dropped limbs that were a hazard to residents, and that, under the community standards, she was empowered to abate hazards. She said the word abate like she had learned it the night before and liked the taste of it. I asked her to show me the standard. I said it plainly, no heat in it. Show me the recorded covenant that gives you a tree on my side of the fence. She tilted her head. She said she did not have to produce anything, that the parcel was functionally part of the community whether the paperwork had caught up or not, and that I would be receiving an invoice for my share of the removal. Then she clicked her pen, made a little mark on her clipboard, and turned to watch the chipper finish, satisfied, like a woman crossing the last thing off a list. An invoice. For cutting down my own tree. I want you to understand that I went inside and I did not break anything, and I did not call anyone names. My hands were not steady, and I stood at the sink a minute and ran the cold water over my wrists the way Dana used to tell me to when my temper got into my arms. Then I took out a yellow legal pad, and I wrote the date, the time, the names painted on the door of the chainsaw crew's truck, the license plate, the make of Brenda's SUV, and every word she had said as close to verbatim as I could get it while it was still warm in my ear. Then I labeled a manila folder Wagon Hollow in black marker, and I put the page inside it. That folder is the whole story. Everything that happened over the next 2 years went into it, one page at a time. And the folder is the reason I am the one telling you this and not the other way around. Mara came home from school that afternoon and saw the stump and the sawdust and the empty place against the sky where the canopy used to be. She got off the bus at the bottom of the drive and walked up slow. And she stopped about 10 feet short of the stump and stood there with her backpack still on both shoulders, just looking up at the hole in the sky where 140 years of tree used to be. The light came down different now, flat and too bright on the grass that had always been shade. She did not cry. She is not built that way, which sometimes worries me. After a while, she asked me, quiet, if we could do something. I told her we could do the right thing, which is slower than the satisfying thing and does not feel as good for a long time. I told her the satisfying thing would be to drive up the hill and have words, and that words evaporate, and that the right thing was to write it all down and let the law be the answer, even when the law is slow. She listened to that the way she listens to everything, turning it over, deciding whether she believed me. Then she said, okay. She set down her backpack, took out her phone, and started photographing the stump from every angle. The cut face, the count of the rings, the fresh sawdust, the tire tracks the chipper had pressed into the wet grass. I did not ask her to. She had been raised by a man who documents, and she had simply become one. That is how it passes down. Not in a speech. In the habit of reaching for the camera instead of the fist. The first formal notice came 11 days later. It was a violation letter on association letterhead. The logo embossed and a little crooked, claiming my fence line encroached 18 inches onto a community setback and demanding I move it within 30 days or face a daily fine. I had built that fence with my own hands to the line my own survey established, the line my grandfather's monuments marked, brass caps set in concrete that I had personally recovered and verified with a county-grade instrument the summer Dana got sick. Because grief makes some men drink, and it made me survey. The fence was not encroaching on anything. There was no community setback, because there was no community on my side of the line. I wrote back one paragraph. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. I stated that the parcel was not subject to the association's covenants, that I disputed the claim in full, and that I formally requested a copy of the recorded document granting the association any authority over my land. I did not argue. I did not explain. A man arguing sounds unsure, and I was not unsure. I kept the green card when it came back with a signature on it. Page 2 in the folder. She did not send the document because there was no document. What she sent instead was a second letter, then a third. Each one adding a fine, each one citing a different community standard with a different number, none of them attached to any recorded authority. The trash can placement standard, the seasonal decor standard, the unapproved exterior color standard, for a barn that had been red since before her parents were born. By December, the alleged balance was $1,100 and climbing at $50 a day. I filed every letter. I answered each one with the same certified paragraph and the same records request, and I never once raised the cost by answering in anger. I want to be honest about how this felt, because the calm I am describing was not the calm of a man who did not care. My jaw ached at night from clenching it in my sleep, and I caught myself standing at the kitchen window at odd hours watching the road. Yet I had learned a long time ago, grading a county road through a slide zone after a wet spring, that the mountain does not care how angry you are. You can curse the slope all you want. The slope just sits there being a slope. You survey, you stake, you cut to grade, you build the thing right, and you let the finished work be the only argument that lasts. So I surveyed. What I mean is that I went back to the county recorder's office in January, on a gray Wednesday with the heater in my truck barely keeping up, and I pulled the entire chain of title on my parcel and on the road, and I pulled the original plat of the Halpern subdivision, and I paid the clerk for certified copies of all of it. I brought it home and laid it all out on my kitchen table next to my grandfather's 1961 easement. And I cleared the table of everything else, and I worked through it the way I would work through a survey that did not close, looking for the error, except this time the error was not mine. And there, in the county's own records, in black and white under the county's own stamp, was the thing Brenda had never once thought to check. The subdivision's recorded access was the easement. There was no other legal way in. No dedicated public road, no separate grant, nothing. Halpern had platted 50 lots dependent on a road he did not own. secured by a grant that named 12 ranches and reserved control to my family in the plain language of 1961. The county planning office had accepted the plat anyway, the way overworked county offices do, checking that the math closed and the fees were paid, and trusting that the access existed because the developer said it did. Nobody had pulled the underlying grant in 40 years. Nobody had read the sentence my grandfather wrote. Nobody except me, sitting at my kitchen table in January with my reading glasses pushed up on my forehead, feeling the whole thing tip over into place, like a survey pin finally finding its hole. I want to tell you about the day in February when I understood this was not just careless. It was a Thursday, a little after 4, with the light already going thin and orange behind the ridge, when a man I did not know pulled up to my gate in a white county-style sedan with a magnetic sign on the door that said, "Code Compliance." He got out, leaving the engine running. He had a fake badge clipped to his belt, the kind you can order online for $19, gold-colored and a little too shiny, and a clipboard. And he walked up to my gate like he owned the latch. He told me he was there to inspect my property for unpermitted structures and that he would need access to the back acreage. He said it in the flat, bored voice of a man who has practiced sounding official. I asked for his county identification, not the badge, his ID. He patted his shirt pocket and produced a laminated card. And even from arm's length, I could see the association's logo on it, the same crooked embossed mark from the violation letters. I told him that was not a county credential, that there was no such thing as an association code officer with authority over my land, and that he was standing one step from private property he had no lawful right to enter. I told him if he opened my gate, I would treat it as a trespass, and the camera over his shoulder was already recording him. He looked up at the camera. Then he looked at the badge on his own belt like it had let him down. He said something about following up, got back in the sedan, and backed down my drive a little too fast, spraying gravel. I photographed the car, the plate, the magnetic sign, and the dent in his back bumper. And that night, I called the county's actual compliance office and read them the name on the card. There was no such person on their staff. There never had been. That was incident number 4 in the folder, and it was the first one that crossed a line into something a court would call a crime. And I wrote the word fraud in the margin and underlined it twice and circled the underline. Around that same time, I started to learn why Brenda cared so much about a 40-acre parcel she had no claim to. Mara, of all people, found it first. She was doing a school project on local history, the kind where you read old county commission minutes online and try to stay awake. And she came to me one evening at the kitchen table with her laptop turned around to face me and said, "Dad, the Sailors own a company. The company was called Hollow Ridge Holdings, and Brenda's husband, Marcus Sailor, a man I had seen maybe twice in 2 years, always at the edge of things, was the managing member. Hollow Ridge had filed a preliminary application with the county to develop the upper bench of the valley, the open shoulder of land above the subdivision, into a 40-unit luxury resort. Cabins and a lodge and a spa. The whole machine. I read the application twice, slow. The resort had no road. The bench had never had a road. The only feasible access, the only grade an engineer could build without moving a mountain, ran straight across my land, along the exact alignment of my grandfather's gravel. Brenda did not want my fence moved because of a setback. She had never cared about my fence. She wanted the road. She wanted my parcel quietly folded into her jurisdiction, the fines and the fake inspector and the cut posts all wearing me down toward the day I would just sign something to make it stop, so that when the resort came, the association could stand up and say the road had always been communal, always been theirs, and roll its construction trucks up my grandfather's grade without ever once asking me a thing. That was the moment the whole shape of it came clear. and I did not feel triumphant. I felt cold and very awake. I told Mara she had done a real piece of work, and I made a copy of everything she found, and it went into the folder. Then I did the thing that a younger and angrier man would have skipped. I drove to the sheriff's substation, and I asked to speak to a deputy about a pattern of harassment and a possible fraud, and I brought the folder. The deputy was a woman named Tess Okafor, maybe 40, with the calm that people get when they have answered every kind of neighbor call there is and stopped being surprised by any of it. She sat me down at a metal table and listened to the whole thing, start to finish, turning the pages of the folder herself. And she was honest with me in a way I respected. She said the association's fines were a civil matter, and that the sheriff could not make a homeowners association stop sending letters any more than they could make the weather behave. She said a filed complaint about my fence had to be logged whether it had merit or not, because that was how the system worked, and that an angry man with a folder full of letters was something she saw twice a week and could do nothing about. The fake inspector, though, she said, and she tapped the photograph of the laminated card. That one is different. Impersonating a county official is a crime. The cut fence posts, if you can show who did it, that is a crime. She slid the folder back across the table, and she looked at me. "Keep documenting," she said. "Do not let anybody onto that land without real credentials or a real warrant." And then she said the thing I have repeated to myself 100 times since. She said, patterns are what we can act on. One incident is a he said. 10 incidents with dates and photographs is a case. Build the pattern and bring it back to me when it is undeniable. I asked her how many it took, how many incidents before it was undeniable. She almost smiled. She said she could not give me a number, that it did not work like a punch card, but that when it crossed the line, I would know it. And so would a judge, and so would she. Then she wrote her direct extension on the back of one of my own folder pages and told me to call her, not the main line, when the next thing happened. There would be a next thing. We both knew it. So I built the pattern. I went home and I added a tab to the folder labeled Simply Pattern, and I started numbering the incidents instead of just dating them. Because Tess had taught me, without quite saying it, that a number is a thing a judge can hold. Spring came. The fines kept arriving, and I kept filing them. In April, the association sent a tow company to remove my utility trailer from my own driveway, claiming it violated a parking standard. The driver was a heavy-set young man who got out, looked at my land, looked at the fence and the mailbox with my name on it, and called his dispatcher right there in the drive. I could hear his half of it. He said, "This is private property. This guy owns the road. I am not hooking on to anything." He apologized to me, honest and a little embarrassed, said somebody had given him bad paperwork, and he left without touching the trailer. I asked him if he would put what he just said in writing, and to his credit he did. A few lines on the back of his own work order, signed, Incident 7. In May, 2 of my fence posts were found cut clean at the base, sawn through with a reciprocating saw on the side that faced the road. So the wire sagged into the ditch, and a careless person could call it a neglect. I had a trail camera on that corner, because by then I had a trail camera on every corner, 2 of them on the road corner, one obvious and one not. The footage from the hidden one showed a man in an association polo shirt kneeling at the base of the post at 2 in the morning with a battery saw, his face catching the infrared plain as day. I did not recognize him, but the polo was enough to start. I copied that footage to 2 hard drives and a cloud account before I did anything else, before I even walked out to look at the damage in daylight, because evidence you have not backed up is evidence you can lose. Incident 8. By June, I had a problem I had not anticipated, which was the neighbors. Most of them were decent people who had bought a dream and did not want trouble. And Brenda had told them a story in which I was the holdout. The bitter old man choking off their road out of spite. A few of them stopped waving. One of them, a retired schoolteacher named Glenda who lived at the bottom of the hill in the oldest of the original 12 places, came up my drive one evening looking embarrassed, twisting the strap of her purse, and asked me straight out whether it was true I was planning to gate the road and trap them all up the mountain. That was the story Brenda had told. The bitter old man with a chip on his shoulder holding the whole community hostage out of spite over a tree. I told her the truth. I told her I had no intention of trapping anyone who had a lawful right to use that road, and that the people with a lawful right were the heirs of the original 12 ranches, and that her place, the old Pruitt place at the bottom, was one of them. She blinked at me. She did not know that. Nobody had ever told these people what they actually owned. I brought her inside, and I showed her the easement on my kitchen table under the lamp, and I put my finger under the sentence and let her read it herself, the part about the 12 named parcels and the grantor's heirs. And I watched her lips move as she read it. And I watched her understand that Brenda had been speaking for 2 years on behalf of an authority she simply did not have. Glenda sat down at my table without being asked. She said, "That woman cut down your wife's tree." It was not a question. I said yes. She was quiet a moment, and then she said she would like a copy of that paper, and that she knew a few other people at the bottom of the hill who would like one too. That was the first crack in the wall. I have to be fair to Brenda here, because the easy thing is to make her a cartoon. And she was not a cartoon. She was a person who had been deferred to for so long that she had stopped checking whether she was right. She believed her own story. When I passed her at the community mailboxes in July, she lowered her sunglasses and said, loud enough for 2 other residents to hear, that some people simply could not understand that a community has standards, and that my refusal to cooperate was hurting everyone around me. That was the second time I heard her say her piece in front of witnesses, and I wrote it down in the truck before I drove home, word for word, because witnesses fade and folders do not. The summer turned. In August, the Hollow Ridge Resort application went to the County Planning Commission for a preliminary hearing, and that is where the 2 threads of my life braided together, because the commission's staff report had a single fatal sentence buried on page 9. It said the project's access was to be provided via the existing Wagon Hollow Road, characterized as a community-owned private way. Community-owned, that was the lie, written into a public document, the foundation of a 40-unit resort. I read that sentence at my kitchen table, and I felt the cold, awake feeling again. And I understood that Brenda's whole campaign against me, the tree, the fines, the fake inspector, the cut posts, all of it, had been clearing the board so that this sentence could stand unchallenged. If I had moved my fence, dropped my dispute, let the association absorb my parcel, that sentence would have become true by default. I did not go to that first hearing and shout. I have watched men shout at planning commissions for 30 years, and I have never once seen it work. Instead, I did the slow thing. I prepared a packet. I had the 1961 easement, certified copy from the recorder. I had my grandfather's deed, the chain of title, my own recorded survey with the brass cap monuments. I had a letter from a title attorney named Reuben Foss, whom I had hired in July with 2 years of saved retirement money, stating in plain professional language that the Wagon Hollow Road was a private easement appurtenant to 12 specifically named parcels. That control was reserved to my family as grantor's heirs, and that no recorded instrument conveyed the road to the association or to any community. And I had the folder. 2 years of dates and photographs and certified green cards and a trail camera video of a man in an association polo sawing my fence at 2 in the morning. The reveal did not happen in a shouting match. It happened at the continued Planning Commission hearing in early October, almost 2 years to the week after the chainsaw crew loaded my grandfather's oak into a chipper. The hearing room was full because the resort was the biggest thing to come to the valley in a generation. Brenda was there in the front row in a cream suit, with Marcus beside her in a sport coat. And the developer's engineer was at the podium walking through the access plan, pointing at a map where the gravel road ran red across the upper bench, calling it the Community Way. When the public comment period opened, I walked to the podium with my packet. I did not raise my voice. I said my name, and I said I owned the parcel the access road crossed, and that I held the recorded easement that controlled it. I laid the certified copy of the easement on the document camera, and the operative sentence came up on the screen at the front of the room. The one about the 12 named parcels and the reservation of control to the grantor and his heirs. Then I laid my deed beside it, and my survey, and the title attorney's letter. The room got very quiet. The commission's own counsel, a county attorney named Ms. Pruitt, leaned forward and read the easement on the screen, and read the staff report sentence calling the road community-owned. And then she looked at the developer's engineer and asked him a single question. She asked him to identify the recorded instrument that conveyed the road to the community. He looked at his binder. He looked at Brenda. He said he would have to research that and get back to the commission. There was no instrument to find. There never had been. I had known that for 2 years, and now everyone in that room knew it. The chair of the commission, a rancher named Bill Adair, who had been quiet the whole evening, said into his microphone that the commission could not act on an application whose access was not legally secured, and that the staff report's characterization of the road appeared to be unsupported by the record. He continued the matter indefinitely, pending a clear title showing. In plain language, the resort was dead until the developer could prove a right to my road. And the only person who could grant that right was me, sitting in the 3rd row in a clean shirt with a folder on my knee. I want to give you the numbers, because the numbers are the gap. Over 2 years, the association had recorded against me, by their own ledger, $14,200 in fines. I had paid none of it, because none of it was lawful, and a court would later confirm that. The resort had cost Hollow Ridge Holdings, by the figures in their own application, over $400,000 in engineering, surveys, and option payments. All of it staked on a road they did not own. And my grandfather's easement had been recorded in 1961, signed in his own hand, 64 years before anyone tried to take it. $14,000 in fines against zero collected. $400,000 spent against a road they could not buy. 64 years of recorded title against a story Brenda told at the mailboxes. That is the gap. You could stand in that room and feel it. Brenda did not collapse all at once. She stood up in the front row and said the road had always been used by the community and that use established a right. And Ms. Pruitt, not unkindly, explained that permissive use under a written easement does not ripen into ownership, and that the easement itself reserved control to the grantor's heirs in plain words. Brenda looked at the screen where my grandfather's sentence still glowed, and for the first time in 2 years, she did not have anything to say. Marcus put his hand on her arm, and she sat down. That was the whole reckoning. No one yelled. The document did the work. The consequences came in the order such things come. The county opened a review of the fake inspector incident, and with my photographs and the cloud-saved footage of the man sawing my fence, The district attorney's office charged the association's contractor with criminal impersonation and criminal mischief, and the association with him as the entity that hired him. Hollow Ridge withdrew the resort application in November rather than litigate a title fight it would lose. And the option payments on the upper bench, $400,000 of them, evaporated because the option was contingent on access that did not exist. Marcus Saylor's company took the loss. The thing Brenda had spent 2 years trying to take, the road, became the exact instrument of her family's loss, which is the way it tends to go when you build on someone else's land without reading the deed. Brenda resigned the presidency in December, not because anyone forced her, but because a special meeting was called by Glenda and a dozen other owners who had finally read the easement for themselves and wanted to know why they had been told for years that they did not own what they plainly owned. The new board's first act was to send me a letter, ordinary paper, no fine, asking whether the heirs of the original parcels and I might sit down and talk honestly about shared maintenance of the road we all actually had a right to use. I wrote back, yes, that is the difference. I never wanted to trap anyone up the mountain. I wanted the truth on the record. Once it was, I had no quarrel with my neighbors. The civil side closed quietly in the spring. A judge voided every fine the association had levied against my parcel, all $14,200 of it, ruling that the association had never had jurisdiction over land that was not in the plat. Reuben Foss told me afterward that the case had been won years before it was filed, in 1961, by a careful man with a fountain pen, and then again by a careful man with a trail camera and a manila folder. I told him I would take that as a compliment to my grandfather and let half of it stick to me. Late that summer, Mara and I rebuilt the corner where the oak had stood. We could not bring back 140 years, but we planted a new bur oak, a good strong sapling from a grower 2 valleys over, in the same green swell where the roots of the old one had pushed up the ground, where Dana is. We set the bench back beside it, the one Mara helped me build, facing the road. She was 16 by then, almost as tall as me, and she stood there with her hands in her pockets, looking at the little tree, and she said it would take a long time to look like anything. I told her that was the point. You plant it for the people who come after, the same way her great-great-grandfather did, the same way he signed a piece of paper in 1961 that protected a granddaughter he would never meet. She thought about that. Then she asked if she could keep the folder when I was done with it. I told her it was hers already. She sat on the bench a while in the evening light with the new oak between her and the road. And the dog, an old blue heeler named Scout, who had slept through the entire 2-year war, came and lay down at her boots, and for the first time in a long time, the corner of my pasture was just a quiet place again, and not a front line. So here is the lesson, the part I want you to actually take home, because a story is only worth the time if it leaves you with something you can use. If you own land, go to the county recorder and pull your deed and read it, the whole thing, including the easements and the covenants and the things written in language you think you are too busy to understand. Walk your boundary and find your monuments. If they are not there, hire a licensed surveyor and have them set. Because a fence is not a property line, and a property line is not a fence. When somebody with a clipboard tells you that your land is functionally part of their jurisdiction, ask them calmly to show you the recorded instrument that says so, and write down what they say when they cannot. Keep a folder. Date everything. Put a camera on the corner, answer overreach with certified mail and not with your fists, because the law is slow and just, and it rewards the person who showed up prepared. The deed older than the claim wins. It nearly always does, if you let it. If you have a story like this, a neighbor or a board or an office that overstepped what it actually owned, put it in the comments. because somebody reading is about to face the same thing, and your story might be the folder they did not know to keep. Subscribe if you want more of these. The slow kind. The kind that end with a document instead of a fistfight. Next time, I will tell you about a woman who inherited a dry lake bed nobody wanted, until the county tried to run a pipeline across it and discovered, 60 years too late, that her family had filed the water right first. Until then, read your deed. Walk your line. Keep the folder.